Well, today, prisoners in at least 24 states are set to participate in a nationally coordinated strike that comes on the 45th anniversary of the prison uprising at Attica. Much like the prisoners who took over New York's infamous correctional facility in 1971, today's prisoners are protesting long-term isolation, inadequate health care, overcrowding, violent attacks, and slave labor. Today's actions follow similar protests earlier this year. In March, thousands in Michigan prisons launched a hunger strike after private vendor Aramark Corporation's correctional services served them unrefrigerated meat, and then the company called Trinity that was brought in to replace them served small portions of watery food. The same company prompted protests in Georgia when it underfed prisoners to the point that one resorted to eating toothpaste.
In May, men in several Alabama prisons began a 10-day strike on International Workers' Day over unpaid labor and poor conditions. Organizers said guards retaliated by serving meals that are significantly smaller than usual, a practice they call bird feeding, and by putting the facilities on lockdown, partially to allow guards to perform jobs normally carried out by prisoners. During the strike, Democracy Now! Spoke with Kinetic Justice, who joined us by phone from solitary confinement in Holman Correctional Facility, co-founder of the Free Alabama Movement, one of the organizers of today's strike as well. He was serving his 28th month in solitary for organizing a similar protest in 2014.
These strikes are our methods for challenging mass incarceration. As we understand that the prison system is a continuation of the slave system, and which in all instances is an economical system. Therefore, for the reform and changes that we've been fighting for in Alabama, we've tried petitioning through the courts. We've tried to get in touch with legislators and so forth, and we haven't had any recourse. Therefore, we understood that our incarceration was pretty much about our labor and the money that was being generated through the prison system. Therefore, we began organizing around our labor and used it as a means and a method in order to bring about reform in the Alabama prison system.
That was Kinetic Justice speaking by phone from solitary confinement in Holman Correctional Facility in Alabama in May. Well, prisoners striking today say conditions are not much different from those that prompted the largest prison rebellion, one of the largest prison rebellions 45 years ago at Attica. It was September 9th, 1971, when state police raided the upstate New York prison, ending a protest against racism, officer beatings, rancid food, no rehabilitation programs, and forced labor. For 4 days, the unarmed prisoners held 39 prison guards as hostages. On September 13th, then New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller ordered armed state troopers to raid the prison. Troopers then shot indiscriminately more than 2,000 rounds. In the end, 39 men would die, including 29 prisoners and 10 guards.
Before we're joined by two guests, I want to turn to Attica prisoner Frank Big Black Smith. He died in 2004 at the age of 70. Big Black, as he was known, became a chief spokesperson of the prisoners during the uprising. In 2000, he and other prisoners won a $12 million agreement from the state of New York. During the uprising, he was forced to lie on a table while officers beat and burned him. He was also threatened with castration and death. This is an excerpt from the film Ghosts of Attica, a Lumiere production made by Court TV that features Frank Big Black Smith and the late Liz Fink, who served as the lead counsel for the former Attica prisoners. The first voice you hear is Big Black.
People laying all over now, all bleeding and bloody and stuff. You know, so everybody know now that it's real, that this is it. You know, they're here now. They're in the yard now. They got control.
State troopers just took their clubs and beat them down the stairs. Broke people's legs, hit them on the tibia and broke tibias. On their back, on their head, in their genitals, on their front. You know, wherever they could hit them, that's where they beat them.
I'm telling you, my name is being called. Where's Big Black? Where's Big Black? Get up, Black, get up. And he busted me with a nigger stick, pickaxe, and got a 38 in his hand. And I gets up, and he bam in my side, in my back, and made me run with my hand on my head over to the side. And before I got over there, 2, 3 more correction officers with him now, and everybody's hitting me.
That was Attica prisoner Frank Big Black Smith. He became a chief spokesperson for the prisoners during the uprising. For more on Attica and its legacy, we're joined by two guests. David Rothenberg is with us, member of the Attica Observers Committee, one of the 35 people who was brought into Attica to negotiate on behalf of the prisoners. He went on to found the Fortune Society. And Heather Ann Thompson joins us, an American historian, author, activist, who's written an explosive new book. It's called Blood in the Water, The Attica Prison Uprising of 1971 and Its Legacy. She's professor of history at University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Her book opens with an epigraph from Attica correction officer Edward Cunningham. He says, quote, "You have read in the paper all these years of the My Lai massacre. That was only 170 odd men. We are going to end up with 1,500 men here if things don't go right. At least 1,500. Heather Ann Thompson, explain why you begin with that.
Well, it's really important for folks to realize that this rebellion of nearly 1,300 men for basic human rights ends brutally when the state of New York retakes the prison, and even the hostages were at the end of this rebellion begging the governor not to come in with force and to do the right thing, improve conditions in the prison. And that quote and several others in the very beginning of the book really reflect the desire of all participants to come to a peaceful resolution and finally do something about the terrible conditions in Attica.
For so many years, that 39 number, 39 men dead, the state authorities said that the prisoners slit the throats of their hostages. That turned out not to be true in even one case. Were they all killed by the state troopers?
Yes. On the day of the retaking, every death was at the hands of trooper or correction officer bullets. And the state stood out and told the entire world that the prisoners had, in fact, killed the hostages. And that story had a devastating effect on the long-term, on the future of criminal justice policy in this country. It really fuels the engine of punitive policy. And to this day, citizens will tell you that the prisoners killed the hostages at Attica.
Well, one of the interesting things, this was at a period in American history when racial conflict was perhaps at its strongest, but yet Attica represented an interracial rebellion. There were white inmates and Latino inmates and African-American inmates who banded together. You tell the story of Sam Melville, the Weather Underground member who was in Attica at the time and participated in the rebellion. There were many Latinos, and in fact, when we were in the Young Lords, we actually had a Young Lords group in Attica prison, and we had two of our members, Jose Fee Ortiz, who's a leader of the Young Lords, and then Jose Parrish, GI, who had come out of Attica, who went up there as part of the negotiating committee. So this was really an example of a racial solidarity among an oppressed group.
Indeed, and that's why it was so threatening to the state. Somehow you have 1,300 men who are otherwise divided by language or political persuasion or ethnicity or race, and they come together over the basic fundamental desire to be treated as human.
David Rothenberg, you were called in by the prisoners, one of 35 people, along with William Kunstler and others, the late, great lawyer. Talk about what your involvement was, why the prisoners wanted you there, and what you found there.
Well, I had been Fortune Society had just started, and we were a volunteer organization at the time. But we were I was in correspondence with Roger Champion and Herbert Blyden, two of the men who emerged as leaders, and we had a little simple newsletter which was banned, and we went to court and won. The federal courts ruled, Fortune versus McGinnis, who was the commissioner, that they had no right to censor the inmate reading material. So I think they thought that we were this powerful organization that could make changes. And when they took over and they asked, they didn't trust the state in the negotiation on the demands, they asked for a list of people to come in and act as observers, and my name was on the list. So I got a call from Arthur Reeve, who was an assemblyman from Buffalo, saying, will you come up to Attica? And I said, not alone. And two of the guys from Fortune, Kenny Jackson and Mel Rivers, we flew up into the yard.
And, David, the importance of having that group there, because in most prison uprisings, there are no outside witnesses. But here you had this group of people, and not just a Kunstler and you, but there were elected officials, Tom Wicker of the New York Times. There was a large group of people that went up there and actually then had a different version of events than the official version.
This was a politically sophisticated group of inmates, which is why the state thought that outside revolutionaries were igniting the trouble. What in fact caused the trouble is you can't put 2,000 people in cages, treat them brutally, and not think there's going to be repercussions. That's what happened at Attica. Can
you describe some of these pictures you brought in, and especially, as you know, because you're on WBAI in New York, speak for a radio audience, describe in detail.
That's Commissioner Russell Oswald meeting with some of the leaders. I recognize L.D. Barkley and Roger Champ and Herbert Blyden. That's people that I know. I think that's Flip Crowley there.
And another picture is prisoners naked in the yard.
This was horrible. They stripped everybody, and then when they brought them inside, they smacked them in their ankles and their knees and their testicles, so that it was brutal. It was, they could have taken over the institution by gassing it, which they did. They didn't have to fire a bullet.
Frank Big Black Smith, when he was laid out, they made him hold a football with his chin, laid out naked on a table as they beat him. Why the football?
It was there.
Heather Ann.
Well, it was there, and he was one of the players on a football team, and he had been targeted because the state accused him of having castrated a guard. So they tortured him to say that if he dropped that football, they were going to shoot him. And he had every reason to believe it, since he had just witnessed, over the course of 15 minutes, an utter massacre.
And Heather Ann Thompson, not only was the scandal of the actual massacre that occurred there at the rebellion itself, but then the cover-up afterward. If you would talk about your quest to find out what actually happened.
Well, so for 45 years, the majority of the records for Attica remain sealed by the state attorney general's office, or at least very difficult to get. And the reason is that for all of the death at Attica, no member of law enforcement was ever held responsible. So the book was the journey to figure out who had created so much trauma, what had happened in the governor's office to lead to this retaking, who were the members of law enforcement that not only shot their weapons, but indeed the highest levels of the state police, who worked very hard to tamper with evidence, to conceal evidence, and to protect their own. And that was a key journey for finding out that information.
You traced the chain all the way up to Washington, D.C. and the White House, right?
Indeed. The story of Attica resonates nationally and internationally, both because it was televised and people cared very much what happened there, but also because at every level for the next 45 years, from the lowest level workman's comp bureaucrat to the presidency of the United States, the Supreme Court, the Justice Department, everyone turned a blind eye to the torture that continued to go on behind the walls of Attica in the wake of the rebellion. And so that story is very important.
There are heroes in our book, and one of them is Malcolm Bell, who was a conservative Republican who was hired by the state to be an investigator, and he couldn't remain quiet because he saw the cover-up. And he emerges from your book as a really heroic figure. Yes. It changed his life because he discovered the truth.
There are a few heroes, and they really stand out. The coroner, who went public at great expense to himself to tell the world that no, in fact, the prisoners hadn't killed the hostages, that it was trooper bullets. Malcolm Bell is a hero because he blew the whistle on the inside of the Attica investigation, that, in fact, they were not going to go after the police, no matter that all the deaths were at the police hands.
And what about that call you received from a clerk in Buffalo about this trove of documents?
Well, indeed. I'd been looking for Attica documents, combing upstate New York, and happened upon a whole series of documents that happened to just be in a random room in a courthouse. And frankly, I don't think that they knew what was there. It was a wall full of Attica documents, and the most important in those were evidence from the state's own investigation, its own records about who had done what at Attica.
And we're going to talk about who did what after this break. We're speaking with Heather Ann Thompson, who wrote the book Blood in the Water, the Attica Prison Uprising of 1971 and Its Legacy. David Rothenberg with us, who is a fixture in New York, is a writer and a WBAI producer, the Pacifica radio station here in New York. At the time, though, in 1971, he was a member of the Attica Observers Committee, one of 35 people brought into Attica to negotiate on behalf of the prisoners. He's founder of the Fortune Society. Stay with us.